Chapter 1728. Cost of Time. The Heart of Kanakit. Suffering unbearable pain, Jet continued to fight the great devil calmly. Her mind was cold and focused, methodically calculating every move and motion of the enemy. She was unable to destroy him, but the abomination could not bring her down, either. As the two of them fought, the harrowing fury of their battle boiling in eerie silence, time continued to flow. She was drawing the clash as much as she could, callously luring the ancient fiend to his eventual end. Once Effie and Kai arrived. How do we kill him then? Kai would be able to weaken the great devil with the power of his voice. Effie would be able to deal some damage to the abominable creature with the help of the Starlight Shard, but not enough damage, considering that it was merely an ascended memory of the 5th tier. The white cloth could shine beautifully in the darkness, as well as imbue her weapons with a rare type of elemental damage, one that wasn't that useful, apart from being able to cut intangible things. It was a bit ironic that the only way to fight the terrible wraith had been given to her for slaying the Lord of the Dead. If Jet remembered correctly, that was the name of the fallen tyrant Effie had killed on the Forgotten Shore. Something moved in her mind. Still, none of it is enough to kill the heart of Kanakit. The most useful thing Effie would be able to do in this battle was augmenting Jet with her ascended ability. However, Jet was powerless against the great devil. Unless she could deliver him 10,000 cuts, the fiend would not go down. However, as Jet moved between the raging storm of screaming souls, slashing the whirling hurricane of sand with a blade made of mist, she felt a seed of an idea or a revelation, maybe, bloom in her mind. What was I thinking about? The Heart of Kanakit. The name was quite peculiar. Jet did not know what Kanakit was, but she had a strange suspicion. That suspicion came from the name of another abomination, a corrupted monster Effie had killed soon after entering the city, and something she had read in a history book. It was a strange thing, really. Jet had never been that interested in history, only learning enough to understand the modern world. However, at some point, and for a reason that she remembered only vaguely, she developed a liking for it. Perhaps it was because of meeting someone who was very enthusiastic about ancient cultures, and being secretly displeased at not having enough knowledge to sustain a conversation. She couldn't remember who it had been exactly, though. Maybe one of the army command officers back in Antarctica, or someone at the academy, which she often visited to enjoy the food in the instructor's cafeteria. In any case, Jet had read about a strange custom that ancient humans had here, in the Western Quadrant, once upon a time. They prepared their dead for burial in quite a peculiar way, removing all the organs from the bodies before placing them in opulent tombs. There was even a legend about a god whose body had been cut apart and then assembled back together, bringing him back to life. The Heart of Kanakit, the Maw of Kanakit. She wondered if there were also the Hand of Kanakit, the Lungs of Kanakit, the Horns of Kanakit. Cassie had said that the great devil was the remnant of a cursed king. Maybe that king had been cut into parts, just like that ancient god, and maybe those parts were kept apart to prevent him from coming back to life like the ancient god had. Why was Jet suddenly thinking about that? She wasn't quite sure yet. The hateful giant of sand was pursuing her relentlessly. The whirlwind of souls surrounding him was just as plentiful as it had been before, as if she had not depleted it even a little. The great devil had slowed down, somewhat, because of the accumulated weight of unnatural lethargy, but that was all. The corrupted terror whose soul was bound to the Black Copish had infected an entire city in the Eastern Quadrant with lethal sloth. The loss of life was tragic, and if Jet had not hunted the creature down in time, it would have become calamitous. But all it could do to the Heart of Kanakit was reduce his speed a bit. Tough bastard. Jet retreated, phasing through a blackened wall. The sand followed her, spilling through the cracks and broken windows before coalescing back into the shape of a gaunt giant. Another flurry of attacks descended upon her. But wasn't it strange? Due to her transformation ability, Jet could become an intangible wraith. Her body was like mist, but that mist was not mundane. It could not be scattered by the wind or dispelled by flames, for example. It could pass through solid objects or move underwater. That was because what looked like mist was not mist at all, but simply a manifestation of her power. Of course, Jet could return to her corporeal form at any moment. The heart of Kanak, though, was tangible and intangible at the same time. The sand comprising his body never phased through the walls like she did, simply penetrating the cracks and gaps in a quite mundane way. Why did the ancient wraith need the shell of sand, to begin with? She barely dodged another storm of souls, each of the myriad of them like a screaming blade, and grimaced. Her reserves of essence were running dangerously low. Feeling a bit regretful, Jet consumed one of the souls bound to her mist blade. That soul belonged to a corrupted tyrant she had killed in Verge, in front of the gruesome wall of flesh that marked the point where the harrowing, mindless mass of the first Seeker's sprawling body began. The silent battle continued, and she endured more excruciating pain. Soon she was forced to consume another soul. That one belonged to a corrupted titan that had fallen to her blade under the walls of a government citadel in the dream realm. The battle against the dreadful creature had cost a lot of lives, but the citadel withstood the calamity in the end. Jet continued to retreat, buying time. Some time later, she absorbed the soul in the black kopish. It belonged to a corrupted terror she had slain in South America. Jet had had to cash in a favor that Saint Neve of the House of Night owed her to make it across the ocean in time with his help. She was starting to falter. The fourth soul dissolved into a torrent of essence that watered her desolate soul. The fourth soul had belonged to one of the saints who had completed his third nightmare in the wake of Antarctica. The public did not know about him, because the man had gone mad soon after transcending. The scars dealt to his psyche by the chain of nightmares were too deep, and his life ended in tragedy. Of course, a much greater tragedy had been prevented by stopping him in time. Jet let out a stifled hiss and staggered back, clutching at her chest. This time, the blow she had failed to evade was too vicious. She consumed the fifth and final soul. This one belonged to the great monster she had slain in Antarctica. She had gone there to find and kill that abominable thing, Winter Beast, but to her dismay, it was already dead. In the absence of the powerful Titan, several dreadful nightmare creatures crossed the strait from East Antarctica to claim its land. Jet had recklessly fought one of them to satiate her smoldering anger. And not good. There were no more souls to consume. Well, there was one. Her own. Smiling, Jet regained her balance and raised her sword. Her cold gaze fell on the approaching devil. "Hey, heart of Kanak." Her voice was calm and full of dark amusement. "I know your secret, also you took too long. It's too late now, bastard." A great dragon landed on the burning building to her left, and a giant foot encased in polished steel landed on the rubble to her right. There would be no need to consume her own soul today. Her reinforcements had arrived. The three saints faced the great devil, standing like a wall between him and the distant troops. For a moment, none of them moved. The abomination was studying the new enemies with its hollow eyes, while Jet and her comrades were observing his gaunt form wearily. "How is the situation?" Her voice sounded a little stifled because of the pain. Kai answered after a short pause. "The Western Quadrant Army should be reaching the wolves by now." Jet nodded slowly. "Good, then Effie, get down. You're too big of a target." In the next moment, the ruins were torn apart by an explosion of harrowing violence. The great devil did not wait anymore. It took a step forward, and at the same time, a hurricane of sand and screaming souls rose, making countless buildings shatter and dissolve into dust. That dust was caught by the wind, joining the obliterating whirlwind. The words of the ancient language resounded once again in the howling of the wind, rustling like a myriad of whispers. They all succumb, satiate, serve. Jet did not listen, throwing herself into the tide of souls. Now that Kai and Effie had joined the fight, the ancient fiend was not using only soul attacks. Instead, a flood of sand flowed from his gaunt figure, turning into a vague figure of a regal man around it. His giant hands shot toward both of them, and his mouth opened, as if trying to utter a curse. The battle was silent no more. Instead, a deafening cacophony of sounds rang across the burning ruins, assaulting their ears like a tide. Before the great devil could utter a curse, though, a giant mace of black obsidian crashed into the mass of sand forming his head. The abomination was not harmed, but the head of the enormous sand projection was momentarily dissipated, taking some time to reform. Instead of his voice, the voice of the great dragon resounded above the battlefield. Slower. Kai's compulsion was not strong enough to overwhelm the will of a great devil, at least not immediately. But, fusing with the debilitating effects of the unnatural lethargy, it bound the fiend with insidious chains. Kai and Jet had gone through countless battles together, and using the soul-numbing blade of the Black Kopish in conjunction with his voice was a true and tested tactic they used against powerful enemies. The dragon pushed itself into the air, dodging one of the giant hands made of sand. At the same time, the second hand reached toward the steel giantess. However, at that moment, her figure flashed blindingly with reflected light and disappeared. Instead, a tall woman clad in polished armor appeared on the rubble, already summoning a spear and a shield. Effie activated one of the enchantments of the Starlight Shard and shouted, "Jet, this thing, how the hell do we kill it?" Jet was in the middle of brandishing her mist blade, which had turned into a war scythe. Now that all souls bound to it had been consumed, there was no reason to stick to the form of the Kopish anymore. "Good question." She obliterated another soul and shouted back, "That abomination from the forgotten shore, the Lord of the Dead, do you remember how you killed it?" Effie used her shield to withstand a terrible blow, putting her shoulder behind it. Despite the harrowing strength of the great devil, she managed to stand her ground. "That mountain of bones, sure, what about it?" Turning into a wisp of mist, Jet evaded a torrent of screaming blades and turned back into a wraith. "On my command, let's do the same." She had read the reports about the Forgotten Shore extensively, so she knew a lot about the strange nightmare creatures of that unexplored region of the dream realm. The Lord of the Dead, as the survivors of the Dark City called it, had been an abomination that lived in the catacombs, its body resembling a mountain of bones. However, those bones were simply the outer shell of the fallen tyrant. Its true body was hidden deep within and resembled a giant corpse worm. During the final battle against the Lord of the Dead, the sleepers led by Nephites had managed to damage the outer shell significantly, which allowed Effie to toss her shield through the heart of the bone mountain. The worm was destroyed, and the tyrant died. Jet wanted to do the same to the heart of Kanakhet. The hint of a revelation she had felt after remembering the Lord of the Dead was about the nature of these two abominations. The fallen tyrant had been an overgrown corpse worm hiding inside a mountain of bones to protect its frail flesh. The great devil, however, was a wraith. She knew better than anyone that wraiths had no fear of physical attacks. Why, then, was the heart of Kanak using a shell of indestructible sand? Why did he have the need to protect himself from physical attacks at all? What was his secret? It was thinking about the ancient legends of the Western Quadrant that had given Jet an answer, one she believed to be true. Who knew that amusing herself with a bit of history would be so useful one day? If Jet ever managed to remember who it was exactly that influenced her to develop such a hobby, she should thank them. I'll deliver the strike, both of you get ready. If she was right, and they managed to pull the assault off, then the great devil would be killed. The other gate guardians must have already been dealt with, considering that Effie and Kai were here. So, killing the heart of Kanak meant winning the battle and living to fight another day. If she was wrong, Jet would think of something else. In any case, the damned fiend would die, the battle would be won by humans, and her soldiers would return home victorious. Defeat was not an option. Back then, in her first nightmare, she had crawled out of a fresh grave, digging herself from beneath the wet soil with her bare hands. Ever since then, nothing Jet did seem that hard in comparison. So killing this great devil could not be that hard either. The battle continued, with the three of them slowly losing ground. The great devil was pushing them further and further back, toward the fire line established by the wolf army. Now that they were closer to the heart of the city, there were many nightmare creatures around. Jet would have loved to go on a rampage and cut some of them down to replenish her essence, but sadly, the ancient fiend was too powerful and overbearing. She could not allow herself even a momentary distraction if she wanted to survive. The abominations, too, seemed to abandon their demented frenzy, and scattered to avoid the rolling whirlwind of destruction that was the battle against the heart of Kanakhet. Jet, Effie, and Kai were already battered and beaten. Both their souls and bodies had received plenty of wounds, well, in her case, not the body. Nevertheless, they were still holding up well. Pain and injuries were nothing new to them. Each possessed a rich experience of crawling out of the most harrowing of hells. All saints did, but these three, in particular, had experienced too many horrors to be deterred by a few scrapes, no matter how frightening the adversary was. It was also because of their experience that they cooperated seamlessly, not only resisting the unholy powers of the great devil, but also slowly luring him into a trap. The heart of Kanak was like a tide of devastation. He was insidious, lethal, and seemingly immortal. No matter how many times they forced the giant limbs of moving sand to collapse, the sand simply reformed into its previous shape again. No matter how many of the souls the fiend had consumed they destroyed, his wailing legion seemed endless. And yet, the moment of his death was swiftly approaching. There were a few things Jet needed to achieve to make sure that her plan worked. She had to learn the limits of both the giant sand projection conjured by the great devil and his actual body, create an opportunity, and make use of that opportunity with flawless timing. Finally, everything was ready. Raising her scythe, Jet yelled, "Now!" In the next moment, the three saints moved like three parts of the same body. The dragon dove down, opening his maw to release a haunting song. That song crashed into the great mass of sand and produced an earth-shattering blast, dissipating the vague form of the towering man for a moment. Almost at the same time, Effie tossed her shield into the breach created by the blast. The shield tore through the air like a cannonball, colliding with the gaunt figure hidden in the hurricane of sand. That figure was the actual body of the great devil, of course, just like the giant projection he had used to fight them. It was also made of sand. Effie's shield could not truly destroy or even damage it, but the dreadful power contained in her throw was so vast that it shattered the torso of the fiend, turning it into a cloud of sand for a split second. Soon, the sand would be pulled back to rebuild the body of the abomination. But not just yet. Jet's icy eyes glinted with dark satisfaction. It seems I was right. There in the chest of the great devil, revealed when his body broke apart, a black human heart was revealed, hovering in the air like an amalgamation of countless curses. The heart of Kanakhet. If Kanakhet was indeed a cursed king whose body had been cut apart and scattered to prevent him from coming back to life, then wouldn't the true core of his remnant, the great devil, be one of those body parts? The wraith was just a manifestation of the sinister will that still dwelled in the vile heart, and the body of sand was just a shell to protect it. Just like the mountain of bones had protected the corpse worm. But now, the heart of Kanakit was stripped of its protection. Before the indestructible sand had a chance to coalesce back into the form of the gaunt man, Jet lunged forward with astonishing speed. Her scythe flashed and cut the black heart apart. The strike was swift and precise, almost surgical. However, a devastating shockwave thundered from the point where the missed blade pierced the heart, spreading in a wide cone and toppling a few buildings. Jet staggered and pulled her scythe back, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted. Did it do it? It had better have, otherwise we'll be in deep trouble. The whirlwind slowly came to a halt. The invisible hurricane died down. Rivers of sand spilled to the ground, forming tall dunes. The wails of tortured souls grew quiet, and then disappeared entirely. Jet looked up at the broken figure of the great devil's shell. Its contours gradually blurred, and then it crumbled like a sandcastle. The spell whispered into her ear. "You have slain a great devil, the heart of Kanakit. You have received a memory." Jet smiled and looked at the bleeding pieces of the black heart with contempt. After a few moments, she shook her head and looked away. "You should have stayed in the safety of hell, fool. Why come to this dire and dangerous world?" The battle wasn't over still. There were still plenty of nightmare creatures in the city, and it would take some time for the government forces to slaughter them all. But with the most powerful gate guardians gone, the three saints should be able to oversee the cleansing without too much problem. Then they would have to gather the survivors, treat the wounded, and transport all civilians away from the ruined city. Work, work, work. There was no end to it. Jet could not remember the last time she had not been overworked. Well, the third nightmare was a bit relaxing in that regard. Perhaps she would take such a vacation again, sometime in the future. But first, Jet absorbed the shattered soul of the heart of Kanakit into her mist blade. At the same time, she took a deep breath, feeling a few soul fragments being pulled into her core, making it a little bigger and capable of containing a little more essence. Her expression changed slightly. Wait, what is? There wasn't just one fragment or even a few. A whole flood of them was suddenly pulled into her soul, too many to count. Countless. What the hell is this? A long time later. The battle was over. The nightmare creatures had been eradicated, and although the 7 gates still remained, barriers were built around them, with soldiers keeping watch in case more abominations arrived. The city was beyond saving. It was damaged too much, and too many people had died. The survivors were slowly emerging from the shelters, while the soldiers were searching the ruins for those who had not been lucky enough to find a way to safety. Jet had no heart to look at the lost faces of the civilians, so she retreated to the top of an artificial hill, observing everything from a distance. She had replenished her essence greatly after participating in the final cleansing, so she was feeling all right. Kai and Effie were sitting nearby, staring at the ruins with exhausted expressions. After a while, Effie suddenly said, "That was a bit scary, wasn't it?" Kai stared at her silently for a while, and then shook his head. "Scary, you know what was scary? Watching a titan fly across the sky like a balloon. Now that gave me a fright." Despite her fatigue, Jet smiled. "Damn, I missed that, what a pity." Effie grinned. "What's the problem? Next time I'll throw a titan in your direction. You'll get the front row view." But then the smile disappeared from her face. She sighed, lingered for a bit, and added wistfully, "But anyway, battles like this one will only become more frequent in the future, won't they?" Jet hesitated, then nodded simply. "I guess." The huntress lowered her gaze. All 3 of them remained silent for a while, not knowing what to say. despite the fact that today's battle had ended in triumph, and a historic one at that. None of the three seemed particularly joyous. Instead, their faces were somber, and their eyes were harsh. Eventually, Effie broke the silence. "Well, whatever. Now about that memory you received. Please tell me it's a weapon." Jet gave her an odd look. "Sorry, it's not a weapon. Actually, that memory, it's a bit strange." Effie cursed, then leaned back in irritation and glared at the sky. "What is it then?" Instead of answering, Jet simply extended a hand and summoned the memory. Soon, a peculiar object appeared on her palm. She raised an eyebrow, looking at it with a vexed expression, and said slowly, "It's an hourglass." NQSC was still shivering in the embrace of winter, but the smell of spring was in the air. The deserted alleys of the outskirts were drowning in dirty snow and deep shadows, with no one to clean the former and no lights to dispel the latter. Many of the decrepit human hives stood empty, their tall walls forming lightless wells. The people who used to populate the hives had long abandoned the cradle of humanity for the vast and dreadful expanse of the dream realm. Sonny was leaning against a wall in one of the alleys. He was clad in the fearsome carapace of the onyx mantle, hiding his face behind a mask, not exactly a suitable attire for the waking world. His appearance would have probably frightened the mundane passers-by, if there were any. Granted, he was standing in the shadows, so no mundane human could see him anyway. "Feels so strange. I can barely recognize the place." The outskirts of today were too different from the overpopulated, suffocating slums where he had grown up. Times were changing, and NQSC was changing with them. Sonny had believed that the world was unchanging, once upon a time. The great upheavals of history, the decimating wars, the descent of the nightmare spell, the legendary achievements of the first generation had happened long before, reshaping the ways of humanity. But by the time he was born, everything seemed lasting and stable, and so he simply took that stability for granted. It was a strange feeling to realize that he was living in the very thick of history instead. Who knew that there had never been any stability, and that the reality he knew was fleeting like a mirage? He sighed and touched his mask briefly. The mask he wore was the memory he had created, definitely not me. Unlike Weaver's mask, which resembled the ferocious face of a demon, this one was quite human and entirely expressionless. With impenetrable darkness nestling in its eyes, the emotionless mask was quite eerie. It was also not as comfortable as Weaver's mask, which hurt his craftsman's pride a little. He sighed. That lazy guy in Bastion is really worthless. Calling himself names was perhaps not very healthy, but certainly amusing. Sonny looked down. Many things were happening at the same time. Nephis had received the orders of the clan Valor elders and was supposed to meet him today to relay their will. In the distant Song domain, Rain had made her way to the roving camp of the road construction crew and was hired as a laborer. The guy in Bastion, truth be told, there was no time to be lazy. From playing the role of the memory purveyor for the Fire Keepers to preparing to forge a sword for Nephis, that incarnation of his was the busiest right now. Not to mention that he had to craft a few memories for Rain in advance of her awakening. The war was drawing closer, and time was running out. Nephis, meanwhile, was running late. Sonny was growing bored. To dispel the boredom, he sent some essence into the handy bracelet and summoned the runes. He studied them for a while, went over his memories, and finally settled his gaze on the list of his shadows. Soon, the runes describing the Soul Serpent ignited in the darkness. Shadow Soul Serpent. Shadow Rank Transcendent. Shadow Class Terror. Shadow Description. When the end came, Shadow was the last of the gods to be destroyed. Many have resented him for creating death, but in the end, death embraced all. His gaze lingered on the description. Sonny had read these runes for the first time a long, long time ago. Back then, It all seemed so strange and mysterious. Now, however, although he knew more about how Shadow God had created death and what it meant, the description of Soul Serpent still touched upon a great mystery. One of the last great mysteries that Sunny still could not solve. He knew how the war between the gods and the demons had started and why, but how did it end? How were the gods destroyed? What could have killed the creator of death? For now, there was no answer. Shaking his head a little, Sunny continued to read the runes. Shadow attributes, shadow guide, spirit guide, soul weapon, soul beast, soul companion. 3 of the attributes had been there before. The first enhanced Sunny's essence control when Serpent was in its tattoo form. The second allowed Serpent to become a weapon. The third allowed it to assume the form of a beast. The spirit guide and the soul companion attributes were new. He concentrated on them. Attribute spirit guide. Spirit guide, attribute description. Soul Serpent enhances the rate at which its master can absorb elemental essence. Of course, both the name and the description of the attribute had been written by Sunny himself, and were the result of his own observations and consideration. Actually, he did not know if this new power of serpents was a separate attribute or an evolution of the Shadow Guide. However, there was an important distinction between the two that had made him divide them. It was that the Shadow Guide only functioned when Serpent was in the form of a tattoo, while the Spirit Guide did not. Whether it was the tattoo, the soul weapon, or the soul beast form's spirit essence, at least that of Shadows seemed more active around Serpent, and nourished Sunny's soul better. Perhaps there was something else to that attribute, but he did not know. In any case, it was quite useful. The soul companion, attribute's name and description, likewise, included some guessing on Sunny's part. He had assumed that it was an evolution of the serpentine steel ability at first, but eventually decided otherwise. Attribute soul companion. Soul companion, attribute description. Soul serpent can fuse with its master's shadow shell, granting it some of its abilities. Sunny felt that he had not explored the depths of this attribute yet, but what he did know was that just like Serpent could augment his body as a tattoo, it could also enhance his shadow shell. The abilities that the shell could channel were Soul Reaver and Slaying Blade. And speaking of abilities, he lingered for a while, then continued to read the runes. Shadow abilities. Serpentine Steel, Soul Reaver, Grace of Shadows, Formless, Mark of Shadows, Slaying Blade. The first 4 abilities were quite familiar to Sunny. The first allowed the soul weapon form of Serpent to assume the shape of any weapon. The second granted Sunny a portion of essence of those slain by its soul weapon or soul beast forms. The third allowed Sunny to bestow Serpent on someone else, and the fourth allowed Serpent to assume the forms of shadows dwelling in Sunny's soul. The fifth and the sixth abilities were new. Mark of Shadows was a peculiar ability, and one Sunny knew the least about, since there was no good opportunity to experiment with it. Ability, Mark of Shadows. Mark of Shadows, ability description. Soul Serpent allows the Lord of Shadows to mark his vassals. Sunny honestly did not know how it worked exactly, so he had allowed himself a few liberties when composing that description. He had been able to find out that Serpent could create lesser versions of itself, for lack of better word. Theoretically, Sunny could place a serpent tattoo on someone, after which a little soul snake would be born in their soul. What was that snake capable of? Was it a new being or a manifestation of Serpent? He wasn't sure. Sunny had tried to mark his shadows, but since they did not really have normal souls, the ability did not work. He had also tried to mark Rain, but nothing happened. He guessed that the soul needed to be at least awakened to nourish and accommodate the little soul snake, and for the Mark of Shadows to take root. And since there were no other volunteers, his experiments had ended there for now. All he could tell was that the Mark of Shadows was connected to the Grace of Shadows, or maybe even an evolution of it. It was a way to share some benefits of being the master of Soul Serpent without parting with it entirely. And finally, there was the Slaying Blade, the most mysterious of Serpent's abilities. What was written in the runes had mostly come from Sunny's intuition, corroborated only slightly by careful observation. Something like that was hard to observe. Ability Slaying Blade. Slaying Blade ability description. When in its soul weapon form, Soul Serpent embodies the death aspect of Shadow God. As such, it ignores the will of greater beings. Perhaps Sunny should have capitalized the word will. Creatures of higher ranks, such as the cursed tyrant, condemnation, had a way of bending the world to their will. And what was the foremost will of all living beings? The will to survive, the will to continue existing. Therefore, killing truly powerful beings was not simply a question of cutting them down. The killing intent of the murderer had to overpower their will to exist, as well. Without the tyrannical will to kill, the sharpest of blades would fail to cut their skin, and the most gruesome of wounds would fail to extinguish their lives. Unless Soul Serpent was involved. From what Sunny could tell, when Serpent assumed its soul weapon form, it was as deadly to the greater beings as it was to mundane creatures. He did not have a very rich experience of slaying truly powerful abominations, so this statement was inconclusive. But from what Sunny had seen, it was also undeniable. He wasn't sure how it worked exactly. Maybe his killing will was enhanced. Maybe the will to exist of the enemy was weakened, or even completely ignored. In any case, he was certain that the serpent's soul weapon form was unexplainably deadly, which wasn't particularly useful to him. For now, since most of the enemies he fought did not possess that much of the will. And yet, Sunny felt that as his power continued to grow, the caliber of the enemies he faced would also become increasingly inconceivable, and therefore, the slaying blade would gain more and more importance in the future. Tremendously so. If I live long enough to see that future. As he thought that, there was a sound, and he sensed movement at the periphery of his shadow sense. Soon, a luxurious PTV awkwardly made its way through the snow and stopped some distance away from him. The passenger door opened, and a familiar figure climbed out of the vehicle, looking around with a deadpan expression. Sunny dismissed the runes and smiled behind the mask. Nephi's had arrived. Nephi's was wearing inconspicuous civilian clothes. Well, there was a medieval flair to them, since the fashion trends had changed in that direction after the advent of the Dream Gates. In the past, only legacies dressed that way, and even then only for special occasions. But now, it wasn't strange to see people in the affluent districts of NQSC wearing capes, waistcoats, and gambesons. Neff's neat ensemble was tailored to fit her figure perfectly. She wore pristine white, her half-shoulder cape embroidered with golden thread, of course. It covered her shield arm, leaving the sword arm free. All in all, she looked exactly how one would imagine a princess of a great clan should look, like, beautiful and breathtaking, her clothes blending modest restraint with opulence. She looked out of place in the dirty desolation of the outskirts. Or, rather, the outskirts looked out of place when near her. As Nephi's was looking around, Sunny moved and emerged from the deep shadows, stopping at the border between darkness and light. Lady Nephi's. She turned to him, then took a few steps and bowed slightly. Lord Shadow, I am sorry for making you wait. Then she tilted her head a little and studied him. Her gaze briefly explored his onyx armor, then drifted to the emotionless mask. After a short pause, Nephi's asked, "Don't you think that your attire is a bit unsuitable for the waking world?" Sunny smiled behind the mask, then raised his chin a bit. "Why, I think I look quite good, don't you?" She seemed to be startled by the question. Of course, her expression remained calm, with none of that bafflement finding its way onto her face. But after spending some time with Nephi's in Bastion, Sunny was slowly relearning how to read her emotions. Eventually, she said, "You look unique, I guess." Her tone was flat. Sunny grinned behind the mask, the darkness nestling in its eye remaining cold and inscrutable. Honestly, he was glad to have the mask hiding his features. Recently, he had been spending a lot of time with Nephi's in Bastion, and most of it was emotionally charged and intense enough that maintaining a calm facade was somewhere between a burden and a torment. He was tired from trying to keep his feelings in check or hiding them when all else had failed. Playing the role of an aloof Lord of Shadows was a bit of a relief. He nodded. "You look stunning as well, Lady Nephi's." She gave him a strange look. Sunny wanted to chuckle, but held himself back. Remembering his previous blunder, he briefly considered adding that Kai Song's daughters could not compare. But after contemplating the matter deeply, he wisely decided not to remind Nephi's about them at all. "Shall we?" She gestured to the luxurious PTV and walked back to the passenger door. The interior of the vehicle was just as opulent as its exterior. The seats were upholstered with genuine nightmare creature leather, while natural wood was used for the fittings and fixtures. There was even a refrigerated bar with various beverages and a table with refreshments. Sunny stared at the refrigerated bar, momentarily lost in studying its construction. Was it purely electrical or used spell tech? If so, which kind? While he was lost in contemplation, the PTV softly drove off. "Right, I forgot to ask where we are going exactly." As if reading his mind, Nephi spoke in a calm tone. "The elders were surprisingly open to most of your terms. Nevertheless, a few details still need to be discussed. We are going to meet with a representative of Clan Valor and reach the final agreement." Sunny stared at her silently. The PTV was much smaller than his dearly missed Rhino, but still more spacious than most civilian vehicles. Therefore, although they were sitting on the same seat, Nephi's was regrettably a bit far. Would it have killed her to sit closer? He asked evenly. "Are you not a representative of Clan Valor, Lady Nephi's?" She smiled faintly. "I am, however there are people who represent it more." After that, both of them kept quiet for a while. The PTV made its way out of the outskirts and past the great barriers of NQSC, bypassing the usual inspection procedures entirely. The great clan stood high above the most privileged of classes, so those associated with them enjoyed a lot of convenience. Of course, all of it was a little ironic. The PTV, the warm clothes Nephi's wore, all of it was a masquerade that people like them willingly upheld. In truth, she did not need to wear a cape in the winter cold, because no mundane cold could bring discomfort to a saint. As for the vehicle, Nephi's could fly, while Sunny could breach great distances with Shadow Step. More than that, both of them could run much faster than the PTV could drive. So, using one had little point. He lingered for a few moments, then asked, "Why are you dressed so warmly?" She seemed to have understood his meaning and shrugged with a faint smile. "Helps me feel human." Sunny tilted his head. Indeed, there was a purpose for the masquerade that went beyond simple convenience. However, he was sitting here clad in battle armor. His demeanor and actions seemed to go against such conventions, so what did Nephi's think of him? That he wasn't human, or that he did not care to feel like one? Sunny turned to look at the partition separating the passenger side from the driver's cabin. Even though he could not see who was driving the car, he could sense their shadow. It was a familiar one, belonging to one of the fire keepers. The PTV was also decently armored and fitted with sound isolation materials, so he could probably speak freely. After hesitating for a few moments, he asked, "I was thinking about one of our previous conversations." Nephi's glanced at him with a hint of curiosity. "Oh." Sunny stared ahead indifferently. "You said that if one wants to kill a sovereign, they need to become a sovereign. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Do you really think that there is no other way? She seemed calm, but then again she always did. Unless Effie was involved. After a long stretch of silence, Nephi's looked away and shook her head. It is not only a necessity, but also the only acceptable way. Sunny did not say anything, knowing what she meant. The sovereigns had covered their backs indeed. Nephi sighed. There are hundreds of millions of mundane people living across the two domains, by now. Their number is constantly increasing. There are many more sleepers each year as well, but not nearly as many as there should have been, because those who enter the dream realm through one of the sovereign gates are protected from having to undergo the first nightmare. As long as they don't leave the borders of their domain, the spell won't call upon them. Her expression darkened. So, what will happen if a sovereign falls and their domain collapses? All those mundane people will instantly be taken by the spell. The casualties will be harrowing, and the nascent human civilization in the dream realm will be decimated. The only way to avoid such a result is for another supreme to take the place of the one who fell, and for a new domain to rise from the ruins of the one that was destroyed. She looked at Sunny somberly. Do you see, Lord Shadow? You asked me how I would fight a sovereign. Killing a sovereign is tremendously hard, but not impossible. Killing one in a way that I can stomach is much more vexing. You might not harbor similar concerns, but something tells me that you do. So you see, in the hypothetical situation you presented, becoming a supreme is not only what has to be done, but also what needs to be done. I won't have it any other way, nor can I. As she finished speaking, the PTV came to a halt. Nephi smiled. But let's not discuss such dreadful matters anymore. We have arrived. Sunny nodded and prepared to exit the vehicle. As he did, he asked with a hint of indifference, Who are we meeting? Nephi's opened the door and climbed out, then said without turning back, Oh, didn't I mention? We are meeting my sister. Sunny did not show any outward reaction. The Lord of Shadows was not someone who would be agitated by a mere mention of the Princess of War, after all. Internally, though, he was troubled. Morgan. His relationship with Morgan of Valor was not very deep, but it was rather impactful. From their first meeting in the arena of the Dream Tournament, to his brief stint as her sparring partner, to the hellish journey across the Nightmare Desert. He couldn't say that he hated her a lot, but he also couldn't say that there was any sympathy between them. First and foremost, Morgan represented the great clans in his mind. Not only their callousness, but also their dread and might. As such, he could never quite perceive her as an individual, which was, perhaps, a little unfair but also understandable. There had been a time when Morgan represented the pinnacle of power in his mind. That time was long gone. By now, Sunny was confident that he was superior to her in all but a few aspects. Morgan did possess a diabolical talent for warfare and strategy. The cruel stratagem she had pulled off in Antarctica would have decimated the forces of Song, costing the Queen of Worms several of her most cherished daughters and the chance to claim the tomb of Ariel, if not for the sudden arrival of the Nightmare Gates, of course. And that was despite Mordred's scheming to ruin Valor behind the scenes. However, that was not what troubled Sunny. What troubled him was that he did not know the current Morgan at all. The old Morgan was dangerous but familiar, like a sharp sword. The new Morgan was a stranger. There were rumors that she had changed a lot after suffering a defeat at the hands of her brother, and the mystery surrounding her third nightmare did not help. Someone cunning and unfamiliar was the exact kind of person he would have preferred to avoid. However, there was no avoiding her now. Sighing quietly, Sunny followed Nephi's into a lavish building. It seemed that the elders of Clan Valor were being considerate today. They had not invited him to the heavily guarded compound of the great clan, choosing neutral territory to conduct the meeting instead. It was just that. The territory they had selected was an exclusive restaurant frequented by the elites of NQSC. Sonny, in his onyx armor, looked more than a little out of place when a dapper maitre d' led them to a private booth on the lowest underground level of the luxurious establishment. He caught a few stares, but not as much as Nephi's. She ignored them casually, so he followed suit and acted as if it was the restaurant that was at fault for the mismatch, not the other way around. Is that the way of a legacy? Soon they entered a spacious underground chamber. The interior here was worthy of being called a work of art, with tasteful decor and softly murmuring water features creating a pleasant and tranquil atmosphere. Or rather, it would have been tranquil if not for the dangerous presence of the woman who sat behind the table, enjoying a glass of red wine. Well, some things never change, I guess. Morgan was as striking as she had been before. She was dressed in a flawlessly tailored business suit, which was entirely black, just like the fashionable leather gloves she wore on her hands. Her raven-black hair only made her alabaster skin look paler, and there were only 3 flashes of vibrant color about her: her ruby cufflinks, her red lips, and her daunting vermilion eyes. Her presence was much more powerful and cold than it had been in the past. The luxurious chamber was permeated by a sense of lethal sharpness, as if everything here was a hidden blade. However, what drew Sonny's attention the most was something that he could not quite put into words. Morgan seemed different somehow. Whether it was her sharp gaze or elegant demeanor, everything about her seemed the same, but also fundamentally changed. Perhaps she had just matured, perhaps it was something else. In any case, Sonny found it much harder to only perceive Morgan as an extension of Clan Valor and its ruler, as opposed to a person. What is up with Morgan? While Sonny was staring at her silently, she put down the wine glass and smiled. Her smile was perfectly pleasant, but looked cold and infinitely sharp despite having no reason to. You are here, sister, finally. Nephi simply nodded. Lord Shadow, this is my older sister, Princess Morgan of Valor. Sister, this is Saint Shadow. Hiding behind the mask, Sonny studied them without saying anything. The two did not look like sisters. In fact, with one dressed in white and the other in black, they looked as if someone had consciously attempted to create 2 exquisite beauties who were the exact opposite of each other. Morgan looked at him with curiosity. Ah, the hermit saint of Godgrave. I've heard a lot about you, Lord of Shadows. It is a pleasure to finally meet you face to face, or face to mask, I guess. Her smile widened a little. Sonny tilted his head, then walked over to the table and pulled out a chair for Nephi's. Once she was seated, he sat down himself and stared at Morgan, who had been observing his actions curiously. The pleasure is mine, Lady Morgan. I've heard a lot about you, too. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, only good things, I hope. Sonny kept quiet for a moment, considering what to say. Eventually, he spoke in a cold and indifferent tone. That brother of yours paid me a visit. He seemed like a weakling. The implication was clear: a person who knew Mordred's true background would undoubtedly know about the Battle of the Black Skull. Therefore, what Sonny had said meant the following. I fought your pathetic brother and defeated him easily. You had fought him and lost miserably. Doesn't that make you the true weakling? Of course, Mordred was not weak. He was the opposite. The vessel that had visited Sonny in Godgrave was merely one of countless that the Prince of Nothing controlled, and an expendable one to boot, which meant that it did not possess a lot of power nevertheless. That weak body had somehow traversed the harrowing hell of the death zone and arrived at the nameless temple in one piece. Even then, Sonny had only defeated it easily because Mordred had no knowledge of how dangerous his soul was anymore. The legion of silent shadows dwelling in Sonny's soul took care of the rest. Sadly, it was a trick that would only work once. What would happen the next time Sonny and Mordred met, he wasn't sure. No one truly knew how many bodies the Prince of Nothing controlled. His transformation ability was similar to that of the Soul Stealer. It allowed Mordred to split his soul and wear multiple bodies at once. It seemed to be weaker than that of the appalling plague, though, or at least more limiting for someone who had not succumbed to corruption and wanted to remain sane. Otherwise, Mordred could have probably consumed all of humanity by now. Sometimes, when Sonny walked around the crowded streets of Bastion, he looked at the faces in the crowd and felt momentarily overcome by fear, thinking that he had no way to know if, maybe, Mordred already had. If everyone had already been turned into his marionettes, with only Sonny and a few powerful people left alive, not knowing that they were surrounded from all sides. It was a disturbing feeling. Chasing the paranoia away, Sonny glanced at Morgan and waited for her reaction. She looked at him silently for a few moments, and then threw her head back, laughing melodiously. "Oh, right, you met that despicable person and roughed him up. That makes me like you already. Please tell me more." After the initial pleasantries, it was time for the actual negotiations. However, Sonny did not have to strain himself too much. Most of the work had already been done by Nephi's and Cassie, so he could just reap the rewards of their efforts. Still, he felt a little wistful. The situation was reminiscent of the last time he had to negotiate with Valor. Back then, it was Morgan who had come to represent the great clan, as well. Sonny had been a mere master and in hot water with her family because of the incident in the Night Temple, trying to avoid becoming their retainer at all costs. Times have changed. Today, he was trying to come to Valor's side instead. However, the situation was entirely different. His position had been hopelessly below the great clan back then, and therefore there had been almost no room for negotiations. Now, Valor needed him much more than he needed them, at least on the surface. As such, he held all the leverage and could dictate his terms freely. Morgan sipped her wine and smiled. "So let me get it straight, Lord Shadow. You are willing to ally yourself with the Sword Domain in the upcoming war. You will fight on our side, aiding our armies to the best of your ability, which, by the way, must be truly a sight to behold, considering how impressed my sister seemed after returning from Godgrave. Taken, even." Sitting by his side, Nephi's remained perfectly impassive. He noticed her grip on the stem of her glass tightening, though, and smiled behind the mask. Morgan continued. "However, you refuse to swear allegiance to my father. You also insist on retaining sole ownership of your citadel, which, as you must know, is the most precious thing you possess in the context of this conflict. More than that, you are only willing to make a personal deal with my sister, not a pact with Clan Valor as a whole. Am I correct?" Sonny nodded. "Indeed." Morgan laughed again. "Ah, really? If I hadn't known any better, I would have thought that you harbor impure thoughts about my little sister, Lord Shadow. You don't, do you?" He answered evenly. "Not at the moment, no." Nephi spared him a calm glance. Before Morgan could reply, however, Sonny added in the same aloof tone. "I hear that Clan Valor offered a marriage alliance to the House of Night, Lady Morgan, but you were refused by that young saint. I wonder if the rumors are true." His wording was ambiguous, leaving room for interpretation. Did he mean that Clan Valor was refused, or that Morgan herself was? Her smile turned a little sharper, her tone sullen. "I must say, for a famous recluse, you are very well informed, Lord Shadow." By now, everyone powerful enough to be informed of his existence had to be wondering about his identity. Someone as strong as the Lord of Shadows could not have appeared out of nowhere. The legacy clans, especially, would not believe that he was a nobody. They believed in family background and pedigree too much, and for a good reason, considering their own accomplishments. From what Sonny knew, the most popular theory about his background was the very same that had often made his ears bleed as mongrel, that he was tied in some scandalous way to the founder of the House of Night, Nightwalker. Some considered him an outcast from the Song domain, while some were certain that he was the bastard son of some legacy clan in the Sword domain. Those who knew more about the truth of the world even suspected that he had been secretly raised by the mysterious third sovereign, Asterion, perhaps hailing from the same destroyed fringe faction as him. Sonny wanted them to speculate as much as possible. The wilder their imaginations ran, the further they would move from the truth, while simultaneously deepening the impression of him in their minds. Morgan shook her head and smiled. In any case, it's fine. You don't have to swear allegiance to my father, and you can keep your citadel. Of course, we will need you to make some concessions in return. Sonny raised an eyebrow behind the mask. He had expected that Morgan would acquiesce to his demands. However, he had not expected that she would do it so easily. His refusal to accept Anvil as his king was easy to swallow. Right now, the King of Swords needed his strength more than his fealty. Sonny could maintain his independence, not becoming a part of the Sword domain until the war was over. It didn't matter too much, because once the war was over and Anvil conquered the world, forcing a recalcitrant saint to submit or be eradicated would not present a problem. If the war was lost, though, he would be dead and therefore problem-free. The Citadel, however, Sonny had thought that Valor would fight for the ownership of the nameless Temple Harder. It presented them with an enticing opportunity to spread the Sword domain into Godgrave before the war had even started after all. I guess they are really wary of me, offering my services to Song instead. Or maybe there was something else at play. He would have to ask Cassie later. For now, though, Sonny stared at Morgan silently, then said without any emotion, "That is good to hear. What concessions?" She looked at him, interlocking her fingers and resting her chin on them. "As my sister has informed you, the war will start with both clans establishing fortresses on the shoulders of the dead god. From there, we will venture deeper across the breastbone, slowly conquering Godgrave and searching for the citadels in the hollows. We will fight each other desperately in the process, of course, trying to stall the enemy." Sonny nodded, prompting her to continue. "Although you can keep ownership of your citadel, you will need to make it available to the forces of Clan Valor. In short, we will establish a secondary fortress there, garrisoned by a relatively small but elite force of awakened and masters. They will have to place their anchors and make use of the gateway, of course, but no saints, as per our agreement." She smiled. "I do not need to tell you how great of an advantage it would be to possess an operational base in the depths of Godgrave. Not only will we be able to hasten our exploration of it, but we will also have an opportunity to put pressure on Song from two sides, forcing them to allocate a significant force to defend their flank, unless they wish to have their supply lines cut, of course." He considered it for a few moments, then nodded. "Acceptable." Morgan continued. "Second, you will have to assist our saints in establishing safe passages through the hollows and share your knowledge of local topography, including the probable locations of unclaimed citadels, the hunting territories of powerful nightmare creatures, and the general characteristics of the abominations dwelling in Godgrave. Having advanced knowledge of these things will be of great help to the war effort, no doubt." Sonny tilted his head. Venturing into the hollows was dangerous but unavoidable. He had expected a condition like that. "I agree." She smiled and picked up her wine glass, bringing it to her red lips. "Well, and lastly, all the rest that one would expect from an ally. You will participate in general battles against the enemy, take responsibility for your stretch of the battlefront, and so on. I trust a warrior like you won't be reluctant to prove his mettle." Sonny smiled behind the mask. "I don't have a desire to prove anything to anyone, but sure, these terms suit me fine." Morgan nodded and offered him her hand. If only everyone was so easy to persuade. Then, I will look forward to working with you in the future, Lord Shadow. Sunny took her hand, feeling a bit disappointed. That was it, wasn't it a bit anticlimactic? They were talking about the war that would reshape the world, throw all of humanity into chaos, and potentially destroy it. And yet the words they spoke were so mundane. But then again, maybe the fate of humanity had always been decided by dry conversations between very few people, held behind closed doors in opulent chambers. He smiled. I am looking forward to the future as well. After Sonny and Morgan shook hands, the official part of the not-so-clandestine meeting was over. Of course, there were plenty of details left to discuss. What troops would be stationed in the nameless temple, how their accommodations would be organized, who would provide provisions to feed them, when the first mapping expedition would start, and 1,000 more. But all these things could be decided at a later date, and in less ostentatious company. Morgan leaned back in her seat and raised her wine glass, smiling with satisfaction. This calls for a toast, if I do say so myself. The three of us will be fighting side by side soon, so, to loyal comrades, may we fare well. Nephi's took a sip of wine without saying anything, while Sonny simply stared at the table, full of regret. He wasn't that attracted by the wine, but there was also a veritable feast in front of him, all dishes prepared by masterful chefs and both extravagantly expensive and endlessly delicious, without a doubt. However, he was wearing a mask, so none of these delicacies were destined to land in his mouth. Damn! Morgan looked at him with a smile. You aren't drinking, Lord Shadow. He stared at her silently for a few moments, then picked up the wine glass. To loyal comrades. Sonny did not move, but on a wall behind him, his shadow picked up the shadow of the wine glass. It brought the shadow glass to its lips and leaned its head back, as if drinking. Then, it lowered its hand and returned to its previous position, copying his pose perfectly. Morgan laughed. Fascinating. Sonny smiled behind the mask. It was indeed fascinating. The three of them were toasting to loyalty, each planning treason. Morgan was playing nice for now, but as soon as the war was over, she would give the Lord of Shadows an ultimatum, submit or die. Sonny was promising to fight for clan valor, but he intended to betray them before the war reached a conclusion. Nephi's was playing the role of an obedient daughter while planning to kill her adopted father, the King of Swords, and usurp his domain. This toast of Morgan's was quite funny. Sonny put the glass down, contemplating the ease with which Morgan had accepted his demands. Was there really no other reason than to prevent him from siding with Song? Claiming a citadel in Godgrave could very well be the deciding factor of the entire war. Valor would not have given up on the nameless temple easily, unless... He turned his head and stared at Nephi's, who was savoring her meal quietly. She wouldn't. Would she? He lingered for a few moments, then asked in an indifferent tone. Why didn't you insist on claiming my citadel, Lady Morgan? People usually tended to dance around the truth in these situations, but there was a benefit to playing the role of a reclusive, aloof, and eccentric saint. If Sonny wanted to be direct, he could very well be as direct as he wanted. Morgan seemed amused by his question. She glanced at Nephi's, then said in a pleasant tone, I can answer, but if you share what I say with anyone else, there'll be blood. It didn't even sound like a threat, just like a fact. Sonny did not bleed easily, so he was not impressed. He stared at Morgan, waiting, but Nephi's answered instead of her. It is indeed exceedingly important to claim a citadel in Godgrave. The side that manages to win the race will be able to unleash the power of its sovereign upon the enemy first. There's no need to describe how meaningful such an event can be. But even without the nameless temple, valor possesses a vital advantage in that regard. Sonny scowled behind the mask, not liking where it was headed. Nephi's took a sip of wine and continued calmly. That advantage is me, and my ivory tower, the only citadel among those conquered by humanity that can move. He stared at her somberly. After a few moments of cold silence, Sunny asked, "Are you insane?" Nephi smiled. "I feel like I've been asked that before." Sunny shook his head. "You are planning to move the ivory tower into the skis above Godgrave. Do you have a death wish and fancy turning into ash?" She lingered for a moment, then shrugged. "I'll try to land it before that happens. In any case, you wanted to keep your citadel, Lord Shadow, and that was the price. Now, you can have the nameless temple, while the sword domain has a chance of gaining a foothold in Godgrave." Morgan chuckled. "My little sister is correct. Needless to say, Song must not know the details of our plans. I'll trust in your discretion, Lord Shadow." Sunny remained silent for a while, considering the implications. These damned fools. So she had agreed to this, for him. Was it Neff's idea to bargain on his behalf, or Cassie's? Why were they being so reckless? He was going to need to rethink a few things. The presence of the ivory tower in Godgrave seemed very improbable, given the region's lethal nature, so he had not seriously considered the possibility. Clan Song seems to be in for a very unpleasant surprise. Sunny contemplated silently. He wanted to say something, but at the moment, the tranquil atmosphere of the underground chamber was suddenly broken by a grating, echoing, ringing sound. The sound came from two directions, impossible to ignore. Sunny frowned, recognizing it. "Really now?" Across the table from him, Morgan paused for a moment, then reached elegantly into the inner pocket of her suit jacket and pulled out a slick communicator. At the same time, Nephi's unbuttoned her waistcoat and produced hers. The two of them studied the screens in silence. After a few moments, Nephi's showed her communicator to Sunny. The Lord of Shadows had abandoned the waking world to dwell in the dream realm, so he naturally did not have one. Sunny looked down, already knowing what he would see. There on the screen, an emergency notification was blinking urgently. "Emergency alert. Emergency alert. Gate activity DATSCTD in your proximity. ETA minutes. Evacuate immediately. 37 minutes." The Obel scale had become much more reliable after the conclusion of the chain of nightmares, but it had never quite managed to return to its past stability. 37 minutes was much more time than the citizens had received back when a gate opened near Rain's school, but still far from a stellar result. Nephi's pressed on the notification, and a map opened on the screen, denoting the impact zone. After another tap, a further message showed up. "Attention all awakened. Request immediate action. Gate category: 2, 61% probability, 3, 34% probability, HIGHER undefined. Strike force ETA, 14 minutes 44 seconds. He let out a small sigh. This time, at least, the government forces would arrive far in advance of the Nightmare Gate's descent. The disaster would be contained, and civilians would have plenty of time to evacuate. Then Sunny glanced at Morgan with suspicion. Had she known that this would happen? Logically, she could not have. But then again, all of it was a little too convenient. Choosing such a public location for their meeting was premeditated, without a doubt. Morgan clearly wanted to send Song a message that the Lord of Shadows was taking Valor's side. Was there a better way to announce it than to be seen clearing a gate side by side with him? Not to mention that it was a good opportunity to gauge his strength. Sensing his gaze, Morgan looked up from the screen and smiled helplessly. "Ah, how bothersome. Do not worry, Lord Shadow, we can stay here until the turmoil ends. The restaurant is outfitted with top-notch defenses and employs awakened guards." She leaned back and then added in a relaxed tone, Or, we can respond to the summons and help the government contain the gate. You are my guest today, so you decide." Sonny stared at her coldly, feeling like he was being played. Before he could answer, though, Nephi's wiped her lips with a napkin and stood up. She hid her communicator, buttoned up her waistcoat, and glanced at Morgan calmly. "I'll go." Morgan laughed. "My little sister is an example to us all, as always. Well, in that case, I'll go too." Sonny sighed and threw a regretful look at all the food on the table. Should he secretly leave a shadow behind and make it steal all these delicacies once they leave? Abandoning that thought, he pushed back his chair and stood up as well. His voice remained indifferent. "Then let's go." 3 of them left the opulent chamber and headed to the surface level of the restaurant, intending to leave. Morgan walked in the front, while Sonny and Nephi's followed a step behind. As they approached the elevators, they could see the staff of the restaurant leading the guests to a heavily armored shelter. This place was usually visited by the elites of NQSC. After all of them were prominent citizens. Their safety had to be guaranteed for an exclusive establishment to fare well. Many of the elites recognized Morgan and Nephi's. Sonny could tell that all of them were relieved at the sight, especially when they saw Neph. Her reputation was not only that of a brilliant warrior, but also that of a selfless champion. Morgan could have decided to ignore a descending gate, but changing star would never. "Lady Nephi's, Lady Morgan, are you heading for the gate?" Morgan slowed down a little and bowed slightly. "Indeed, have no worry, ladies and gentlemen. We will contain it in no time and you'll be able to finish your meals in peace. Please excuse us." Nephi's bowed silently and continued on her way, surrounded by excited whispers. As they entered the lift, Morgan sighed and looked at her sternly. "Really, sister, couldn't you have said something? That old man manages the hydroponic complex that supplies half of the grain to Bastion. The young couple is the daughter and son-in-law of the chief administrator of the Central District of NQSC. The rest hold important positions as well. Leaving a good impression would not hurt anyone, would it?" Nephi's glanced at her emotionlessly. "Actions speak louder than words." Morgan laughed. "What does the action of ignoring them say, then?" However, she didn't press the issue. She wasn't someone who cared for ingratiating herself to people, either. In fact, it was the people who were desperate to get in her good graces. Not only was Morgan a saint, she was also the princess of the sword domain. Her importance would trample all of these elites combined. Soon, they emerged from the restaurant. The beautiful building had undergone a transformation, plates of heavy armor descending to cover the doors and the windows. Sonny would have expected the armor to be made from reinforced alloy, but to his surprise, it was actually made from Dream Realm materials. Truly an exclusive establishment. A familiar fire keeper, Seed, hastily opened the door of the PTV and invited them inside. The drive was a short one, only taking a few minutes. Most of the vehicles on the road were moving away from the impact zone, but they were driving to its very heart. In the end, they arrived almost at the same time as the first squads of the government forces. The gate manifested in a park. It had not opened yet, of course, but there was already a sinister atmosphere in the air. There was a strange haze above the frozen pond, a precursor to the appalling fissure that would split reality apart soon. Armored vehicles had torn apart the white blanket of snow, and soldiers were hastily raising fortifications. The government awakened were silently preparing for battle, while a small group of awakened volunteers were huddled together, discussing their aspects. The arrival of the luxurious PTV caused quite a stir, and when Morgan and Nephi's emerged from it, everyone simply froze, staring at them with wide eyes. That's the Sword Sisters. Goddess Morgan, Goddess Nephi's. Quiet, you fool, they are saints, they can hear you. Who is that with them? Is he an echo? I don't know, but that guy is super creepy. Sonny stared at the soldiers menacingly, unhappy with the way they ogled Nephi's. Morgan and Nephi's, meanwhile, calmly walked to the person in charge. It was a master wearing a military coat on top of light memory armor. He, too, was both elated and taken aback at the sight of them. Lady Morgan, Lady Nephi's, it is an honor to meet you." Morgan nodded, flicking a snowflake off the lapel of her stylish black suit jacket. "We were nearby, so we decided to help." The master seemed relieved. That is great. With 2 saints we can." Standing behind them, Sonny shifted slightly and looked up. A wide smile appeared on his face, hidden by the emotionless mask. 3 saints, but actually make it 4. No sooner than he thought it, there was a rustle, and a dashing figure descended from the gray sky. The soldiers, who had been stunned by the arrival of 2 sublime beauties, now seemed dumbstruck. "And Nightsinger. He's so. Oh my gods. I am not dreaming, am I?" Sonny's smile trembled. That bastard doesn't change. Indeed, the man who had descended from the sky was none other than Nightingale, Saint Kai the Dragon Slayer. Wearing beautiful armor made from ivory scales and burnished bronze, with luscious auburn hair and mesmerizing green eyes, he was just as tantalizing as ever. No, even worse. Kai had always been unreasonably attractive, but now that he was a saint, his beauty was almost blinding. It was to the point where Sonny felt a strange impulse to look away, but was also incapable of doing so. There were only 2 transcendents out there who could challenge Kai in the looks department. One of them was Cassie, the other was Beastmaster. Sonny could not compete. Not that he needed to. "I have my charms as well." Really, he looked quite good. It was just that anyone would feel that comparing themselves to Kai was simply unfair. It was a cruel injustice. While Sonny was staring at him sullenly, Kai landed softly in front of Morgan and bowed. Then he looked up with a refreshing smile. "Lady Nephi's, Lady Morgan, are you here to help?" Morgan remained silent a split second longer than usual, then reciprocated his smile. "Ah, yes, as I was saying, we were nearby." Kai's smile widened a little. "Please accept my deepest gratitude. I've just returned from the Western Quadrant and happened to be in NQSC by chance. Truly, what a fortunate turn of events. This gate won't disturb the citizens, with such distinguished warriors protecting them." Nephi's looked at him and asked with a faint smile, "How is Effie doing?" He chuckled. "Everything is well. The battle was a tough one this time, but we pulled through. Little Ling already has a new favorite bedtime story." With that, he turned to Sonny, lingered for a moment, and asked politely, "It is a pleasure to meet you, sir. I am Saint Kai with the government forces, and you are?" Sonny hesitated, considering how to answer. Eventually, he decided to do some mischief. Staring at Kai emotionlessly, he said in a calm tone, "You can call me Shadow. I am your best friend." Kai blinked a couple of times. Slowly, a funny expression appeared on his face. His thought process was rather clear. "My best friend, I clearly have never met this person before. But he doesn't seem to be lying. No, but it can't be true. I would have remembered having a best friend. So if he's not lying, but also not telling the truth, I see this man is insane. He sincerely believes his lie. Wait, oh gods, he's not assassin, is he?" Kai's magnetic smile dimmed a little. At that moment, Nephi's gave Sonny a strange look and intervened. "This is Saint Shadow. He is a bit eccentric. He is also here to help." Kai hesitated for a bit, then nodded dubiously. "I see. Thank you for volunteering, Lord Shadow." With that, he turned to the master in charge of the government forces. "Scrap the battle plan and move your people back. We will take care of the gate. With some luck, You guys won't even have to put down the stragglers." The master nodded gratefully. "Yes, Saint Kai." By then, the wind was stirring, and a strange dimness was spreading over the park. The air above the frozen pond was trembling more intensely. The descent of the Nightmare Gate was not far. Kai turned to Morgan and Nephi's, asking politely, "How do you want to handle this?" Morgan lingered for a few moments, then gave Sunny a teasing look. Her red lips twisted into a smile, and she said pleasantly, "Lord Shadow, would you like to do the honors? My sister was so eloquent when describing your prowess. I must admit, I am a little jealous at not having had the pleasure to witness it myself." Sunny stared at her coldly. "Want to measure my strength, do you?" He remained silent for a while, then shrugged. "Sure, stay here then, I'll handle it." "Well, then you'll have to be disappointed." As the reality split, torn apart by a dark fissure, a graceful figure of a stone knight rose from his shadow, two ruby eyes igniting with cold crimson flames. Sunny looked up at Saint, pointed at the gate, and said evenly, "Go deal with it." His taciturn knight tilted her head slightly, then turned around and looked at the gate. Although she did not say anything, somehow, it felt as if her aloof gaze was full of disdain. Summoning her black blade and a round shield, she gave its rim 2 lukewarm blows and headed toward the frozen pond with graceful, unhurried steps. Morgan, Nephi's, and Kai were left staring at her in bewilderment. Sunny crossed his arms and said in an even, indifferent tone, "That should do it, everyone. Relax and enjoy the show." When the appalling darkness of the Nightmare Gate split reality apart, sunlight dimmed and turned strangely bleak, making the world look desaturated. A gust of cold wind rushed across the snowy park, as if the sky itself was being sucked into the black fissure. A moment later, an eerie shockwave rolled over the soldiers, making them stagger. Neff's white cape fluttered in the wind, but none of the 4 saints moved. For a moment, the only being moving in the impact zone was Saint. She walked steadily toward the gate, her graceful figure emanating the feeling of a cold, indifferent inevitability. Kai stared at her back for a second, then cleared his throat. "Your echo seems really impressive, Lord Shadow. Stylish, too, such a chic and understated armor design, monochromatic in theme, yet rich and expressive instead of being dull. What a beautiful use of form and texture variation to counterbalance the lack of a dynamic palette. Splendid, really. Wait, where was I?" He paused for a moment, and then added with an embarrassed smile, "Right, what I meant to say was, your echo can stall the abominations and break their momentum. We will follow behind and engage the nightmare creatures when they get past her." Sunny glanced at him and tilted his head a little. "Get past her?" Kai hesitated a little, unsure of what to say. "Yes, there is a high enough possibility that this gate will reach Category 3 after all. Even if she is a transcendent echo, it might be a bit tough." Sunny smiled behind the mask. "Just watch." He turned away and stared at Saint. Kai, Nephi's, and Morgan had no choice but to follow his example. In fact, Sunny felt a bit awkward, just standing there and doing nothing while Saint did all the work. He would have summoned the shadow chair and sat down, but sadly, that chair usually stood behind the reception desk of the brilliant Emporium. Anyone who had visited the dining hall could recognize it at a glance. Standing awkwardly it is, I guess. Out there in front of them, the first of the nightmare creatures appeared from the dark fissure of the Nightmare Gate. It was a hulking beast with a bulging body, terrifying muscles moving smoothly under its tough gray hide. The abomination's hind legs seemed underdeveloped, but its front limbs were grotesquely large, resembling craggy tree trunks. 2 vicious tusks curved upward from its jaw, as long as pikes. The beast let out a deafening bellow and charged forward, the ground shaking from its heavy footsteps. Saint did not slow down. She simply lowered her shield, meeting the abomination's charge head-on mid-stride. In the next moment, the dreadful tusks hit the onyx shield and shattered. Next was the creature's head. Its skull burst like a rotten pumpkin, splattering across the snow in a crimson wave. The massive abomination collided with the shield and was crushed into pulp against its surface, only to be tossed aside by a flick of the wrist a moment later, falling to the ground in a lifeless, bloody heap. It was as though it had used Saint to commit suicide. Standing by Sunny's side, Kai blinked. Nephi's, who had seen the taciturn shadow before, seemed unsurprised. Morgan was too shrewd to show a reaction, but her gaze had turned a little sharper. Sunny smiled. In front of the gate, more nightmare creatures were born from the appalling darkness. A tide of them, each seemingly powerful enough to rip an armored vehicle to shreds. Saint finally seemed to pay them attention. Gripping her sword, she lunged forward and turned into a dark blur. A cloud of snow, ice, and torn ground exploded into the air from where her foot had pushed against the ground. By the time the soldiers had registered that, she was already among the abominations. To them, it looked as if a hurricane of darkness descended upon the tide of nightmare creatures, tearing flesh from bones and swiftly turning crimson from the haze of blood. A cacophony of howls filled the air, and severed bodies rained down on the snow, which was swiftly painted red and melted under the heat of harrowing violence. Of course, the four transcendents could follow the battle clearly. To them, it looked quite different. Instead of the hurricane of blurry darkness, they saw Saint wielding her sword with chilling grace, reaping a harvest of lives with each movement. Her swordsmanship was solid and precise, each step measured, each slash flawlessly efficient and inescapably lethal. The black sword rose and fell, severing abominations in half. The onyx shield swung, crushing their skulls and breaking their bodies. The sword was like the ruthless blade of a guillotine, while the shield was like an impenetrable wall of polished black stone. Saint was so tyrannical that even when surrounded by monsters and demons, she seemed like the true hellspawn. Despite the gruesome massacre she was perpetrating, her dark armor remained spotlessly clean, with not even a single drop of fetid blood landing on its onyx surface. Her dreadfully beautiful battle art was like an elegant dance, allowing her to weave between the falling bodies without becoming stained by their filth. The tide of abominations collided with her and came to a shuddering halt, dissolving into a haze of blood right in front of the stunned soldiers. Morgan took a deep breath. "Lord Shadow, this echo of yours is quite fearsome." Kai nodded slowly. "Yes, indeed, you must cherish her a lot." Sunny gave them a short glance, then turned back to face the nightmare gate. "Actually, she is the second weakest among my servants." Which was technically true, after all, among his shadows. Only the marvelous mimic was lower than Saint in rank and class. Of course, Sunny would not bet money on any of his other shadows surviving in a battle against the Onyx Saint. He wasn't even sure that he would survive something like that if push came to shove. Kai stared at him with wide eyes, prompting Sunny to smile behind the mask. "The second weakest." He nodded. "I killed the original as a sleeper after all. It was a long time ago." The beautiful archer paled. "As sleeper, you killed that as a sleeper." Sunny remained silent for a moment, then shrugged. "Sure, come to think of it, among the nightmare creatures I killed as a sleeper, she was one of the weakest as well." Saint had been a mere awakened monster back then, and Sunny had killed plenty of abominations of higher rank and class on the Forgotten Shore, including a great devil. So, if one only took pure strength into account, Saint had indeed been in the lower tier of the creatures slain by him there. Kai opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Finally, not knowing what to say, he turned away stiffly. Sunny chuckled internally. "I miss teasing this guy." In front of the nightmare gate, Saint had mercilessly obliterated the first wave of the abominations. The same fate awaited the second wave, and the third. Not a single nightmare creature managed to escape her blade. Observing the scene of chilling carnage, Sonny couldn't help but feel a little wistful. He remembered vividly the first time he had encountered a nightmare gate, how desperate he had fought, and how impossible the task of stemming the tide of abominations had seemed. In the end, he would have failed if not for Jet's timely arrival. Yet this time, the category of the gate was one rank above the one he had defended against as mongrel. However, Sonny did not even have to move a finger. Just one of his shadows was enough to contain the threat, and he did not even have to bestow the full augmentation of all his shadows upon her. So much time had passed, and so many things had changed, some for the better, some for the worst. Sonny secretly glanced at Nephi's, and Kai as the gate guardian finally emerged from the fissure. The creature looked like a mountain of gray flesh, its towering body brimming with bulging muscles, sharp tusks, bloodied spikes, and ghastly bone armor. It bellowed furiously, making the entire park quake. A corrupted tyrant, from the looks of it. Standing on a pile of corpses, Saint glanced at it and finally deemed it necessary to summon the elemental darkness from her heart. A dark aura enveloped her black sword, and a cold chill ran down Sonny's spine. Her ruby eyes flashed with furious crimson light. The tyrant surged forward, and at the same time the black blade slashed the world apart. Now who's showing off? A thin line slowly revealed itself on the towering abomination's powerful body, cleanly dividing it into two vertical halves. Then, it slowly oozed blood. The tyrant stumbled, then slowly crumbled to the ground, its body falling apart into two bloody chunks. The handy bracelet spoke into Sonny's ear. "You have slain a corrupted tyrant. Your shadow grows stronger." These were the only fragments Sonny had received from this fight. Looking at the carcasses of the massacred nightmare creatures, which piled high in the suddenly silent park, he sighed. What a waste! Saint stared at the bleeding chunks of the dead tyrant with indifference, then turned and glanced at Sonny. Receiving his nod, she took a step back and dissolved into shadows. A few moments later, Creepy and Crazy silently returned to him and fused with Naughty, who had been pretending to be a normal shadow all along, resting leisurely on the ground beneath his feet. Sonny looked at Morgan and remained silent for a moment. "My apologies. I'll try to give you an opportunity to witness my prowess some other time." Gate Crisis had come to an end just like that, leaving the government soldiers standing there in stunned silence. In the end, none of them had to do anything to contain the nightmare creatures. The arriving reinforcements were shocked to see piles of corpses littering the ground. They had been expecting to dive into a dire battle, but ended up witnessing the aftermath of a chilling slaughter instead. Of course, it was not as if they had nothing to do. The park had been ravaged by the devastating battle, and the ugly fissure of the nightmare gate still shimmered in the air. Sonny looked at it with regret. There were not that many parks in NQSC, and this one would be unusable for the foreseeable future. Unless a cohort of masters challenged and conquered the nightmare seed, this place would never be safe for humans. The initial tide of abominations had been obliterated, and the gate guardian fell. However, new nightmare creatures could emerge from the fissure at any moment. The government forces would have to build a containment zone around the gate, complete with powerful explosive charges and a fortified perimeter. Mundane soldiers and awakened warriors would have to stand watch inside the zone at all times, participating in sporadic skirmishes every time an abomination wandered into the waking world. Kai was looking at the gate as well, his expression grim. In the decades since the descent of the nightmare spell, many of such containment zones had littered the areas populated by humans. There were many here in NQSC, too, and the more of them appeared, the thinner the government forces had to be spread. The situation had only worsened after the chain of nightmares. It was comparatively easy to find cohorts of awakened willing to challenge second nightmares and hopefully conquer it, closing the gate. The one near Rain's school had long disappeared, for example. But it was much harder to close a Category 3 gate, since only masters could hope to survive the third nightmare. Even then, most did not. And although the number of masters humanity possessed had increased tenfold, and continued to grow with each year, the number of gates of higher categories was increasing faster. Kai sighed and shook his head. His voice sounded a bit tired when he mumbled quietly, "No rest for the wicked." Morgan, who had been conversing with the master in charge of the government soldiers, glanced at him with curiosity. "Oh, will you lead the charge personally, Lord Kai?" He smiled weakly, causing a few of the mundane soldiers to sway, and shook his head. "I'm not sure. I'll have to discuss it with my superiors first." She nodded in understanding. "Well, for what it's worth, Clan Valor is willing to offer help this time. After all, I didn't get to do anything despite showing up so confidently. My hands are itching for a fight." Sonny was listening to them in confusion. He was certain that none of it showed in his body language, and yet Nephi's decided to explain. "The government is trying to adapt to the new environment. Since there are too many gates that can't be closed, they are constantly searching for a way to lessen the strain of guarding them all. The most effective method is to allow a saint to follow the call to the nightmare seed and cleanse the territory surrounding it from all abominations. That way, they won't be wandering into the waking world, at least for a while." She studied the dark fissure of the gate and added, "I have participated in plenty of these cleansing operations myself. Many of the legacy saints have followed my example as well, offering their services, especially those of the new generation, who hold me in high regard. Their battle experience is comparatively poor, so they see it as an opportunity to sharpen themselves. As long as the vicinity of the nightmare seeds is cleansed at set intervals, the strain on the government resources is lessened drastically." Sonny stared at her for a while, then said in a cold tone, "Sounds like trying to plug holes in a crumbling dam." Nephi smiled faintly. "Indeed. However, it also teaches the people who are sealing the holes how to swim." Then her expression darkened a little. "But I agree with your sentiment. It is merely a stopgap measure." Kai and Morgan walked over, catching the tail end of their conversation. The charming archer smiled. "As long as there are brave people who are willing to rise to the occasion, everything is not lost. We will continue to keep this world safe, or at least as safe as possible, like you did today, Lord Shadow. Please, accept my sincere gratitude." Sonny stared at him for a while. Then he nodded and said evenly, "Fine, I accept it." Kai gave him a dubious look. Not knowing what to say, he turned to Nephi's, intending to thank her as well. "Should I do it or not?" Sonny hesitated for a moment, but couldn't help himself. So he added in a tone of indifference, "Don't expect my help next time, though. I have a bad history with nightmare gates. The last time I happened to be near one, I ended up in a custody dispute with a cursed terror. Encountering the Category 4 gates in Antarctica had led him to the third nightmare, after all, where he ended up meeting a certain vile bird." Kai forgot what he was going to say to Nephi's and stared at him numbly. "A custody dispute." Sonny gave him a nonchalant nod. "Yes, the cursed terror wanted its spawn back, thieving scumbag." The charming archer took a deep breath, looked at the sky, and then forced out a few words, his tone stifled. I see." He struggled to say something else, but Sonny interrupted him. "By the way, nightingale, it's a bird, isn't it? I dislike birds." Kai froze, looking at him with a troubled expression. Sonny stared at him for a bit, then leaned forward, raised a hand, and patted him on the shoulder. "It's all right. I'll make an exception for you, Saint Nightingale, since we're friends." With that, he turned to Nephi's and said without any emotion, "I am ready to leave." She was staring at him strangely. Morgan was as well. Sonny tilted his head a little. "And what?" The two of them glanced at each other, then shook their heads at the same time. No, it's just that you have a unique way with words, Lord Shadow." "Nothing." The former was said by Morgan, while the latter was said by Nephi's. He smiled behind the mask. "Curious, I've been described as unique twice today. I am starting to suspect that it is not a compliment." Morgan smiled pleasantly and said in an exceedingly polite tone, "It isn't." Shaking her head, she bowed to Kai lightly and turned away, heading for the PTV that had driven them here. Sonny followed, giving Nephi's a chance to say a proper goodbye to the charming archer. She caught up with them soon, wearing a complicated expression. Or rather, her expression was as stoic as always. However, Sonny could feel a bit of tension hiding in the depths of her gray eyes. They passed the military vehicles and approached the PTV. The firekeeper who had driven it, Seed, was already back. She had joined the volunteer awakened before the gate opened, intending to lead them into the battle. Of course, their participation had not been necessary in the end. Seed was on her way to open the passenger door when Nephi stopped suddenly, looking at the PTV with a frown. Sensing her unease, Morgan and Sonny stopped too. Morgan glanced at Nephi's, raised an eyebrow, and asked with a hint of amusement in her voice, "What's the matter?" Neph remained silent for a few moments, studying the luxurious vehicle somberly. Then she slowly turned away and looked at Sonny. "Lord Shadow, I apologize." He blinked a couple of times. Was she apologizing for having dragged him to an opening gates? No, Nephi saw the fight against the nightmare spell as a sacred duty of all awakened. She would not have apologized for something like that. "What then?" Hiding his confusion, Sonny asked in a cold tone. "What for?" Her expression remained calm when she answered. "It seems that I am about to be assassinated. Sorry for the inconvenience." "And what?" Before Sonny could react, Seed unlocked the passenger door and pulled on the handle. In the next moment, the PTV disintegrated in a blinding flash, and the roar of a deafening explosion thundered above the snowy park. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.